Mia Thompson sat upright in the Harrow carriage with her gloved hand resting on the single valise at her feet, as though any slackening of posture might allow the city to reach through the glass and drag her back by the wrist. The marriage register lay folded inside her reticule, the ink still fresh enough that she could smell it through the leather. Mia Thompson, wife to Julian Harrow. The wrong brother. The one with no glittering title attached to his name, no published fortune, no place in her mother's careful parade of approved men. She had signed in full view of London with two startled witnesses and a curate who kept polishing his spectacles, as if clarity might alter what he had just written. She had chosen scandal for 1 hour so that she would not be managed for the rest of her life. The carriage rolled south, leaving polished streets for narrower roads where hedges leaned inward and the wheels struck ruts with a jarring insistence. She kept her face turned towards the window because the man across from her, her husband, had said little beyond practical courtesies, and silence felt safer than observation. His coat was plain, dark wool with one cuff worn thin. His hands were clean, but calloused at the fingers in a way that did not belong to drawing rooms. He had introduced himself at the church in a voice that carried no urgency and no apology. "Mr. Julian Harrow, at your service, Miss Thompson." By noon, she was Mrs. Harrow, and the city that had called her dutiful for 26 years called her reckless by tea. She had expected relief to arrive with distance. Instead, each mile sharpened the shape of what she had done. It had not been impulse. It had been arithmetic. Lord Ashcombe had been waiting in her mother's morning room for 6 weeks, while families traded terms over her future as if they were negotiating timber rates, and Mia had endured the fittings, the measured smiles, the remarks offered in front of her and not to her. Useful colouring, sound hips, quiet enough for management. She had answered every inquiry with civil phrases and watched her life close like a gate. Then she had stood behind the morning room door 2 days ago, her hand on the latch, and heard her mother say in that level voice that made cruelty feel administrative, "She is unfit but useful. An heir secures the shipping vote." Unfit but useful. She had not entered the room. She had not dropped the tea tray or wept or demanded explanation. She had walked upstairs, opened her wardrobe, and taken down the old valise her father once used for Liverpool inspections. By dusk, she had sent a note to the one Harrow brother London ignored. When they reached the Kent house, she understood at once why society called it lesser, and why men like Lord Ashcombe laughed when its name appeared on invitations. Harrow Lodge sat beyond a stand of beech trees, square and severe, built of pale stone weathered to ash. No lanterns burned in the front windows. The gravel before the steps needed raking. Ivy had taken the eastern wall as if the house had not enough rank to command a gardener's full war against it. Yet the door opened before the carriage stopped, and 2 servants stood waiting in neat livery, neither curious nor warm. "Mrs. Harrow," the butler said, bowing with exact correctness, "your room is prepared." Not madam, not lady. Mrs. Harrow, as if the title had been measured and filed down to utility. She stepped into an entry hall that smelled faintly of beeswax, old smoke, and winter air trapped in drapery. Somewhere deeper in the house, a clock struck 5 with a hollow tone. Her husband handed his hat to a footman and did not offer his arm. She preferred him for that restraint. No performance, no sudden gallantry to ornament an arrangement both of them understood, was tactical. He gave one instruction, low and precise. "Mrs. Harrow's valise goes to the blue chamber. Tea in the west sitting room." "Yes, sir." Sir from men older than he was. Another small misalignment she filed away and refused to examine. By the second morning, the structure of her new confinement had become clear. Breakfast arrived on a silver tray left just inside the blue chamber door. Always warm, always punctual, always unattended. If she opened before the maid retreated, the girl curtsied and spoke only 2 words: Mrs. Harrow. The household moved around her with trained economy, neither hostile nor companionable. In the study downstairs sat account books bound in calfskin, stacks of correspondence, and a locked cabinet whose key remained visible on the desk blotter, as if to test whether she would touch what she had been trained to ignore. She did not touch it, not on the first day. At 11 each morning, letters arrived under Lenora Thompson's black wax seal, carried by a mounted courier who waited for replies. The first read, "You will return when instructed." The second, "Affection is irrelevant." The third, delivered with rain still shining on the envelope, said simply, "Your signature settles this." Beneath the line sat her mother's name in the same disciplined hand that had once copied Mia's childhood French verbs and corrected each accent mark in red. Mia set that third letter beside the untouched marmalade and watched the light shift along the breakfast spoon. Her pulse did not quicken. Her breathing stayed even. Control had become less a virtue than a mechanism, like the springs of a watch kept wound by habit. She wrote her reply in 4 words: "I remain where I am." She blotted the ink, folded the page, and rang for the courier. He left without expression. In London, Lenora Thompson had always looked as if she were waiting for better company. Even in private rooms she dressed for witnesses. Pearl pins aligned precisely at the throat, sleeves without a crease, dark hair drawn smooth enough to reflect candlelight. She did not shout. She did not need to. She issued decrees the way clerks issue receipts, with no variance for mood. You will wear blue tonight. You will smile when introduced. You will not discuss shipping before supper. To outsiders, she was immaculate composure. To her daughter, she was governance with a maternal title attached. Mia had once believed that obedience could purchase peace. The belief lasted until the morning room door. That memory returned now in sharp fragments whenever the house fell quiet. The scent of bergamot from Lord Ashcombe's tea, the scrape of chair legs, her mother's voice, level as winter water. She is unfit but useful. An heir secures the shipping vote. Ashcombe's answer had come with a soft laugh, the kind men use when discussing risks insured by another person's body. If she proves difficult, Lenora had not paused. Her trust remains under my hand until issue. Difficulty is a temporary matter. Mia remembered the grain of the door panel beneath her fingertips, the small splinter that caught her glove, the instant her stomach turned not with shock, but with recognition. Insurance, that was all. Daughter as collateral, marriage as ballot, child as instrument. She had gone upstairs and packed without calling for her maid. On the 4th day at Harrow Lodge, she found her husband in the study at dawn, standing over a spread of ledgers as pale light edged the window panes. He did not start when she entered unannounced. He looked up, met her eyes, and inclined his head in acknowledgement that felt almost like respect. Mrs. Harrow. Mr. Harrow. His eyes were grey, not cold but watchful, the kind of eyes that track detail before deciding what to disclose. A smudge of ink marked the side of his thumb. On the desk lay columns of figures from her father's former shipping accounts, entries she knew by memory from years of silent observation at the edge of business dinners where men forgot she could count. "You rise early," she said. "So do frauds," he replied. No smile, no elaboration. He shifted one ledger slightly toward her, then away, as though offering and retracting in the same motion. Measured, testing. She held his gaze. "What do you gain by this arrangement, Mr. Harrow?" He closed the book with a soft thud that echoed in the room's wood panelling. Outside, a cart rattled over the estate road. Inside, he answered without ornament. "Time, Mrs. Harrow." For what purpose? His expression did not alter, but something in his posture settled into authority that sat oddly with the worn cuff and modest house. "For the truth your mother has buried." The sentence landed between them like a document signed by both parties and not yet read aloud. Mia felt the old instinct to step back from uncertainty, to choose safety by refusing the question. Instead, she moved to the desk, set Lenora's latest letter beside his ledger, and laid her fingers flat on both papers at once. "I did not marry for affection," she said, "nor I. I married to remain unowned." At that, the corner of his mouth shifted by the smallest degree, not yet a smile, merely recognition of terms correctly stated. He reached for the letter, glanced at the seal, and handed it back unopened. "Then we understand each other." From the corridor came the butler's discreet knock. "Mr. Harrow, the steward requests an audience regarding household disbursements." "Send him in." The steward entered with ledgers under his arm and gave Mia a bow that was technically proper and stripped of warmth. "Mrs. Harrow." "Not madam, never madam." He addressed the next sentence to Julian as if she were furniture. "The mistress has no role in these figures, sir. It would be simpler if—" "Stop," Mr. Harrow said. He did not raise his voice. He did not look away from the steward's face. Yet the room altered around that one word. Even the butler in the doorway straightened, as if a rank had been invoked. "You will address Mrs. Harrow directly when the matter concerns her household," he said. "You will show her every account she requests. If simplicity is your objective, begin there." The steward flushed, bowed to Mia more deeply this time, and corrected himself. "My apologies, Mrs. Harrow. Shall I place the disbursement books in the West Room for your review?" Mia met his eyes and answered in the same controlled register she had learned from her mother and repurposed for her own survival. "You shall." When the steward withdrew, silence returned, but it no longer felt like confinement. It felt provisional, as if the walls of Harrow Lodge were holding their breath with her, waiting to see what kind of marriage had been signed in London and what kind of war had just quietly begun. The butler closed the study door with the soft precision of a man preserving hierarchy, and Mia remained where she stood until the echo of his step withdrew down the corridor. Mr. Harrow had returned to his papers without dismissing her, which in this house counted as invitation. She moved to the side table, sorted the disbursement books the steward had brought, and found that each volume had been ruled in a different hand, as though responsibility itself had been distributed to avoid ownership. Coal, wages, repairs, tenant relief, cart hire, chapel subscriptions, figures without faces. She drew a chair to the desk, untied her gloves finger by finger, and began to read while he read opposite her. Two strangers under one roof performing trust, before either was prepared to name it. By the end of that first week, Harrow Lodge had revealed its pattern in full. Breakfast appeared in silence at 7, always covered, always sufficient, never generous. At 9, the housekeeper, Mrs. Beale, delivered keys for linen presses and cellar cupboards, waited for signature, then took them back, as if lending authority by the hour. At 11, the courier from London arrived with Lenora Thompson's seal, reins still damp from hard riding, posture stiff with the discomfort of entering a household where rank and rumour did not agree. Mia answered each letter at the escritoire in the West Room and handed each reply to the same gloved hand. She never delayed, she never embellished. "My position is unchanged. I decline your summons. Send all matters in writing. The man rode away with her refusals tucked beside his saddle knife, and never once looked her directly in the face. At luncheon, she ate alone unless Mr. Harrow happened to return from the lower fields before the soup cooled. At dinner, she sat across from him beneath portraits of solemn Harrows, whose painted eyes observed the table with hereditary disapproval. Conversation remained practical, almost severe but never empty. He asked whether the dairy account balanced against market rates. She asked why Cartwright fees doubled in March and vanished in April. He answered with documents, not assurances. The household watched this exchange with discreet astonishment, as though they had expected a decorative bride and received an auditor instead. The injustice was not loud, it had the discipline of routine. Mrs. Beale addressed instructions to the maids and repeated them to Mia only after the fact. The steward requested permission from Mr. Harrow for purchases that belonged to the mistress's domain, then corrected himself when Mia fixed him with a level gaze. Footmen announced her as Mrs. Harrow and left a beat of silence where warmth might have stood. Even the chapel pew at Sunday service carried message as clearly as any insult. She and her husband were seated at the side aisle, visible and peripheral, while wives with thinner fortunes and better pedigrees took the centre benches and stared without moving their heads. She did not complain. She learned. On the 9th morning, frost traced the inside of her chamber window in fern-like veins. Mia dressed before the maid arrived, pinned her own hair, and went down to the west room with a candle because she had found the coal entries did not align with the deliveries noted by the stable master. 3 columns disagreed by £27 across 2 months. She recopied each figure, then followed the discrepancies into tenant allotments and found names crossed out beside cottages still occupied. Widow Price, 2 children, and an invalid mother. Dock foreman Hale, injured shoulder, temporary stoppage. Pike, gardener, dismissed due to age. Beside each name, relief discontinued by order, initialed HS. She did not know the initials, but she knew the shape of theft disguised as economy. It was the same shape she had seen in London when men called extraction stewardship. Mr. Harrow entered while she was still writing and set a folded map on the desk between them. "You are in my chair," he said. She looked up, pen suspended. "Then claim it." A pause held. Then he took the chair beside hers instead. He read what she had copied, one line at a time. His expression did not shift, yet his hand flattened on the table as if steadying anger he preferred not to display before breakfast. "Where did you find these?" "In your own books," she said. "Not hidden, merely tedious." His eyes flicked to hers. Grey, alert. "Most fraud depends on that." He asked no praise, and offered none. He rang for coffee, requested the steward, and when the man arrived, Mr. Harrow spoke in the same measured tone he had used in the study days earlier. "Mrs. Harrow has identified irregular relief suspensions. You will produce authorizations for each line she marked." The steward swallowed. "Sir, those orders were transmitted from London by Mrs. Thompson's office as provisional guidance." "Then write London," Mr. Harrow said. "Tell them Harrow disbursements are governed in Kent." The steward hesitated, eyes darting once toward Mia before returning to her husband. "As you direct, sir." "As Mrs. Harrow directs in household matters," he corrected. When the door closed, Mia set down her pen and flexed fingers gone numb in the cold. "You expected this," she said. "I expected resistance. I did not know where they would place it." He touched the page where she had written Pike's name. "Now we know." That afternoon, Lenora's letter arrived earlier than usual, as if speed itself could enforce obedience. "You will present yourself in Grosvenor Square on Thursday. Lady Ashcombe has agreed to receive you privately. No mention of scandal will be made if you comply." Mia read the lines once, folded them with exact creases, and wrote her answer beneath her mother's printed command on the same page. I will not attend. She sealed it, handed it to the courier, and watched him mount without waiting for tea. 3 days passed before the first snow settled over the estate roads in a thin, brittle layer that made every sound carry farther than it should. After Sunday service, while the congregation lingered in clusters at St. James's Gate, Mrs. Dalloway leaned toward her companion and let her voice drift just loud enough to travel. One hears she married him to spite her mother. How practical of her. The companion replied, "Practical women do not keep their place long." Mia heard both sentences. She adjusted her glove, thanked the vicar's wife for the sermon, and walked to the carriage without altering pace. Back at Harrow Lodge, the courtyard bustled with the small confusions of noon. A cart stuck at the turn, 2 grooms arguing over tack, kitchen smoke flattening under the low sky. Near the stone well, an old man in a threadbare coat stood with one hand braced against the wall, waiting while a scullery boy hauled water past him without stopping. His boots were split at the seam. His right sleeve hung empty from elbow down, pinned neatly at the cuff. The boy glanced at him, then away. "Who is that?" Mia asked Mrs. Beale, who had come to receive her cloak. "Pike, ma'am, former gardener. He was dismissed in Michaelmas. He comes Sundays for bread." The old man swayed once, recovered and pressed his mouth into a line that made refusal look like habit rather than injury. Mia handed her cloak to the nearest footman and crossed the yard. She took the dipper from the well chain, filled it herself, and held it out. "Mr. Pike." He looked up, startled that she knew his name. His eyes were clouded blue, proud despite hunger. "Mrs. Harrow, I cannot presume." "You are not presuming," she said. "You're drinking." He took the dipper with his left hand and drank in careful swallows, as if even thirst must be managed with decorum. She waited until he finished, filled it again, then sent the scullery boy to fetch broth and bread from the kitchen with instructions to return to this exact spot. The boy ran. A shadow fell across the paving stones. Mr. Harrow had come down from the carriage on the opposite side of the yard and was watching them, hat still in hand, expression unreadable. He said nothing while the bread arrived, and Pike ate, standing by the wall, shoulders gradually unknotting with warmth. When the old man had gone, Mia turned to leave, but Mr. Harrow stepped into her path by a measured inch. "You read his name in the books." "I did." "And you remembered it." She met his gaze. "Figures ought to correspond to lives, Mr. Harrow. Otherwise they are only camouflage." Something passed over his face then, brief and unguarded. Not surprise. Recognition. He looked towards the gate where Pike had disappeared and spoke as if issuing a routine order that happened to carry moral weight. "Mrs. Beale will arrange a weekly parcel for him and for Widow Price, charged to discretionary relief. Signed by you." Mia inclined her head. "Thank you." His mouth shifted. This time it was unmistakably a smile, small and transformative, stripping years from the reserve he wore like armor. "Do not thank me for authorizing your own decision." The courtyard noises resumed around them. Harness buckles, kitchen doors, the whistle of wind through the beach stand. He put his gloves back on, then paused as though revising an intention mid-thought. "Tomorrow," he said, "I inspect the lower warehouses and the estate road accounts. Attend me at 8 if you wish to see where your mother's guidance has been most expensive." It was the first time he had requested her presence rather than permitting it. Mia held his eyes and heard, beneath the formal words, the shift she had been waiting for since the church register dried. Not affection, not yet. Alignment. "I will be there," she said. He gave one short nod and turned toward the house. At the steps he stopped and looked back once, snow bright on his shoulders, voice carrying cleanly across the stones. "Bring the coal ledger." She did not smile until he was inside, and even then the expression felt less like softness than like a boundary moving outward by one deliberate inch. In the West Room she opened the disbursement books again and marked a fresh column for names restored, while outside the winter light thinned over Harrow Lodge, and the small machinery of her new life, once built to contain her, began to answer to her hand. In the West Room she drew a straight line beneath Pike's name, wrote "reinstated" in a narrow hand, and sanded the ink while the fire burned low and the house settled into the hour before dressing for dinner. The coal ledger lay open beside her, its paper rough at the edges from too many hurried fingers, and she copied 3 supplier marks onto a clean sheet so she would not need to search in the morning. She heard doors close along the upper corridor, then the distant clatter of plates in the servants' hall, then nothing at all. Quiet in this house was never empty. It listened. When she rose from the desk, her feet answered with a sharp protest she had ignored since church, where she had stood too long on frozen stone while women studied her sleeves and whispered over prayer books. One heel had rubbed raw through her stocking. Her right glove had split at the seam when she caught herself on the iron carriage step. She set both gloves beside the ledger, flexed stiff fingers, and told herself pain was practical. It proved she still occupied her own body, still moved by choice and not instruction. A maid appeared with hot water for washing, and the message that dinner would be laid at 7. Mia thanked her, dismissed her, and sat on the edge of the bed to unlace her boots. The room smelled of starch, lavender soap, and winter damp brought in on her hem. She had just peeled the torn stocking from her heel when a knock came. Formal, 2 measured taps. "Enter." It was not the maid. Mr. Harrow stepped in only far enough to place a covered basin, a folded square of linen, and a small packet tied with twine on the table near the hearth. He remained in gloves and coat, as if he had paused between obligations rather than sought her out. "The apothecary sent salve for cracked skin," he said. "Mrs. Beale mentioned the church steps were poorly cleared." Mia looked at the items, then at him. "Mrs. Beale is observant. So are you." His gaze moved once, briefly, to the torn glove she had left by the desk. Not intrusive, merely precise. He took a sealed envelope from his coat pocket and set it beside the basin. "You are excused from dinner this evening. I have informed the household it is by my instruction." The seal on the note was Harrow black wax, plain, without crest. Practical kindness wrapped in authority. Shield first, explanation second. She heard herself answer in the same register. "You did not need to do that." "Yes, I did." He paused as if weighing whether to add more, then chose brevity. "Tomorrow will be long." He gave a small inclination of the head and withdrew before she could offer gratitude he would likely refuse. The latch clicked. The corridor resumed its hush. Mia crossed to the table and broke the seal. The note contained one line in his hand. "Household business postponed to morning. Rest is also governance. No signature, none required." She did not smile. She set the paper flat, warmed the linen in the basin steam, and cleaned the scrape on her heel with deliberate care while twilight pressed blue against the window. It was a small thing, deniable to anyone inclined to dismiss it. No declaration, no softened title, no breach of terms. Yet the room felt altered, less like assigned quarters, and more like ground held in common by 2 people who understood that survival could be made of details as humble as bandage cloth, and an excuse sent down the stair before gossip could climb it. At dawn, She carried the coal ledger to the front steps herself, Valise muscles still alive in her shoulders from that first day in the carriage, and found him already waiting beside a dogcart, with 2 bays harnessed and steaming in the cold. He wore the same plain dark coat, mended at the elbow, but the way he checked buckles and wheel pins belonged to a cavalry yard, efficient and unornamented. He took the ledger from her hand, offered no assistance into the cart, and said only, "We begin with the lower road." Frost held in the ruts until mid-morning. They passed tenant cottages with smoke thin above chimneys, then turned toward the warehouses near the river bend, where Harrow contracts met dock labour, and loss could be hidden in transit fees no one of rank thought fit to audit. He stopped first at a way station whose clerk greeted him with a start that looked very much like alarm. "Mr. Harrow, we did not expect inspection today." "That is why we are here," he said. He handed the man Mia's copied sheet of supplier marks. "Explain these duplicate deliveries." The clerk stammered through an answer about weather and delayed carts. Mia stood beside the scale house door, said nothing, and watched Mr. Harrow ask 3 short questions that left no room for performance. Dates, signatures, receiving witness. At the third, the clerk produced a second register from beneath the counter. Cleaner paper, corrected numbers. Hidden in reach, not in vault. Fraud by convenience. Mr. Harrow read 1 page, then passed it to Mia in full sight of the men present. "Your assessment?" She compared entries, tapped the margin where initials repeated across different hands. "Same pen, same pressure, copied in 1 sitting." The foreman shifted his weight. "With respect, sir, this is not work for—" Mr. Harrow did not raise his voice. "For whom?" The foreman lowered his eyes. "For me to question." "Correct." He turned to Mia. "Record every discrepancy. We will file notice before noon." Outside, as they climbed back into the cart, she said, "You let them see me examine the books." "They must learn the shape of consequence," he replied, "and so must London." By the 2nd week of December, their mornings had acquired a rhythm neither announced. Mondays they reviewed wage rolls in the West Room before breakfast trays were cleared. Wednesdays they took petitions in the study, tenants standing hat in hand before the desk while Mia logged requests, and Mr. Harrow ruled on arrears with a severity that was never careless. Fridays they walked the estate road as far as the toll gate where carts from the dock entered Harrow land, counting axles and cargo marks against invoices the steward swore were complete. They spoke often, but almost never about themselves. In those repeated hours, contradictions gathered with the persistence of rain. At the magistrate's office in town, a man twice Mr. Harrow's age and visibly his social superior rose when he entered, then addressed him as "Sir," before catching himself and dropping to Mr. Harrow. Mr. Harrow did not correct the first title. He let it pass as if accustomed to obedience from men who did not offer it lightly. At the foundry yard, a former sergeant with a scar across his jaw looked up from a shipment docket, saw Mr. Harrow, and came to attention without thought, heels striking stone in one clean motion. "Command acknowledged," the man said, then flushed, muttered apologies, and pretended to search for a missing stamp. Mr. Harrow's face remained impassive. He asked after inventory and moved on. In the carriage one afternoon, when sleet struck hard enough to blur the glass, his glove slipped as he reached for a map tube. Beneath plain leather, a signet ring flashed at the base of his hand. Heavy gold with a crest she recognized from a portrait in the long gallery, an older Harrow mark reserved for heirs. He adjusted the glove at once. Neither of them referenced it. In the study, he wrote instructions with his left hand when the fire burned low and ink thickened, though she had watched him sign receipts with his right at the warehouse desk 3 hours earlier. Ambidexterity could be practical. It could also be training acquired where errors were punished. She noticed each inconsistency. She followed none to its end. 3 days after their first warehouse inspection, Lenora's courier arrived at dusk with a letter carrying 2 seals, Thompson and Ashcombe, pressed side by side like clasped hands. Mia read the invitation to Lady Ashcombe's musicale, the carefully neutral language, the promise that past irregularities would be overlooked if she presented herself suitably accompanied. She folded the page once and took it to the study where Mr. Harrow was reviewing tenant drainage maps. "My mother has discovered amnesia," she said, laying the letter beside his elbow. He scanned it quickly. "Will you attend?" "No." "Why?" She held his gaze. "Because forgiveness offered as leverage is still leverage." A beat passed. Then he nodded. "Very good. Is that all?" "For tonight." He reached for his pen. "Send your reply before breakfast. Delay invites interpretation." She almost laughed at the dryness of it. "You are adept at social warfare for a man in a mended coat." He looked up, grey eyes steady. "Cloth is cheaper than disclosure." The sentence sat between them, opaque and exact. She returned to the west room and wrote, "I decline with thanks." She sent it at first light. On Sunday, after service at St. James's, the vicar's wife stopped Mia at the lich gate and pressed a parcel of old blankets into her hands with embarrassed haste. "For Widow Price, if you are still arranging relief." The woman's voice held apology she could not publicly name. Mia accepted the bundle, thanked her, and carried it herself to the cart, while 2 gentlemen nearby pretended not to observe. At Harrow Lodge, she found Pike in the courtyard again, this time upright and waiting, with a list of winter pruning he had drafted despite his dismissal. She read it, asked 2 questions, and hired him as consulting gardener, by weekly stipend charged to grounds maintenance. Mrs. Beale blinked once, then fetched the contract book without comment. When Mia handed Pike the first payment, his left hand trembled so visibly that she looked at the wall behind him to preserve his dignity. From the terrace above, Mr. Harrow watched without interruption. Later, in the passage outside the study, he said, "You reinstated him on paper and in practice." "Yes." "Good." He moved to pass, then stopped. "There is a tenant hearing tomorrow. 3 families contest eviction notices issued from London Authority. I want you present." She answered at once, "I will be." Not as observer. She understood. Not ornament. Function. As record. "As judgment," he said, and walked on. The hearing filled the study with wet wool, mud on boots, and the sharp smell of anxiety. The steward read each London notice aloud in a voice attempting neutrality. "Mr." Harrow asked for the issuing signature. Each bore initials from Lenora's office. Mia requested tenancy durations and harvest yields, compared them with arrears, and found that 2 families had overpaid transport fees for months while being marked delinquent in rent. Misclassification as extraction method. Familiar pattern? New victims? She set down her pen. Not delinquent, misposted. The steward's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Harrow, these matters are technical." She turned 1 page toward him. "Then be technical. Explain this subtraction." He could not. Silence lengthened. One tenant woman clutched her shawl and stared at Mia as if seeing, perhaps for the first time in that room, someone who spoke in the dialect of ledgers and consequence with equal fluency. Mr. Harrow closed the file. Evictions stayed. Accounts corrected within 48 hours. Mrs. Harrow will audit completion. After the tenants left, he remained standing by the mantel, 1 hand braced on the carved stone. The afternoon light made the scar along his wrist, usually hidden under cuff, briefly visible. Old, pale, straight as a blade line. "Where did you learn to read people and numbers the same way?" she asked, surprising herself. He looked toward the window instead of at her. "In places where mistakes were expensive." "Military places," a fractional pause. "Among others." He gave no further opening. She did not press. That evening, a note came to her room under his seal before dinner. "Delay meal by 1 hour. Road committee detained. Eat without ceremony if needed." It was the second practical permission he had sent, and again, it contained care disguised as administration. She read it twice, then went downstairs anyway, choosing the small dining room instead of the formal table. When he arrived late, coat damp and hair wind-ruffled in a way that stripped him of austerity, he stopped at the threshold as if surprised to find her still there. "You were told not to wait," he said. "I was not waiting," she answered. "I was eating slowly." He took the seat across from her, and for a moment, the line of his mouth gave way to that rare, changing smile she had seen once in the courtyard. "A formidable distinction, Mrs. Harrow." "An accurate one, Mr. Harrow." They ate in companionable quiet, broken only by practical exchanges about river levels and timber bids. No declarations crossed the table. No intimacy was named. Yet when the footman reached to clear her plate half-finished, Mr. Harrow said without looking up, "Leave it." The footman obeyed. Later, as she climbed the stairs with candlelight moving over worn banister wood, Mia understood that their alliance had shifted again, not by speech, but by accumulation. Bandage linens set by a hearth, a chair taken beside hers instead of reclaimed, authority shared in rooms built to exclude her, and a man whose name still sat on uncertain ground, choosing repeatedly to place that uncertainty between her and the world rather than between her and the truth. She entered the blue chamber, set tomorrow's ledgers in a neat stack, and slept without once reaching for the valise at the foot of her bed. At dawn, she woke to the sound of cartwheels on frozen gravel and lay still for a moment, listening to the house begin its day in careful layers. The scuttle of coal in hallway buckets, the pantry door opening, Mrs. Beale's low instructions carrying through floorboards worn thin by generations of footfall. The valise remained at the bed's foot where she had left it, straps buckled, posture of departure preserved by habit more than intention. She rose, dressed, and went downstairs with the wage ledgers under her arm. The breakfast tray in the west room held toast gone pale at the edges, and one folded letter under Lenora Thompson's seal. Mia broke it without ceremony. Further allowances are suspended pending your return to London and proper compliance with family directives. Any debts incurred in your name after receipt of this letter are your private liability. Your signature settles this. She read it twice, set it beside the marmalade untouched, and opened the weekly disbursement schedule. Household wages were covered through Harrow accounts. Tenant relief lines had already been cut and restored and cut again in repeated skirmish. The discretionary column, the narrow place where mercy could survive arithmetic, was nearly empty. Mr. Harrow entered as she completed the column marks. Mrs. Harrow. Mr. Harrow. He removed his gloves, glanced once at her mother's seal, then at the ledger in front of her. What has London withheld this time? My personal allowance. She did not lift the letter. She has remembered that money can perform affection when affection fails. He stood very still, then said, "You may draw against house funds." That would be convenient for my mother's accusations. Mia blotted the page and closed the book. She would prefer to call me a fortune hunter rather than a daughter she failed to manage. I will not provide text for her argument. His gaze held hers for a beat longer than form required. If constraint becomes acute, inform me. It is already acute, she said, and because she had decided to live plainly in this house, she added, I am not asking you to solve it. His answer was immediate. Noted. December cold tightened over Kent so hard that the river edges skinned with ice each morning, and even the groom spoke softly to preserve breath. Petition slips multiplied in the study basket. 2 dock families requested medicine. One requested coal and was denied by the steward under London instruction, pending verification of employment status. Verification required 3 signatures, none obtainable before Monday. It was Thursday. Mia folded the petition and carried it in her pocket through the afternoon accounts, through supper, through the evening review of transport manifests. When she undressed, her hand went to the small velvet case in the dresser drawer before thought could interfere. Inside lay 1 emerald bracelet, the last of her father's gifts not already surrendered to household expectation. He had given it on her 21st birthday with awkward tenderness and a merchant's practicality, saying gems were portable certainty in uncertain markets. She had worn it rarely. Lenora had preferred pearls. Mia closed the case and placed it on top of tomorrow's gloves. She did not ask permission in the morning. After chapel, she took the smaller carriage with 1 footman and told the driver to stop in town first, at Barron & Sons, pawnbrokers and watch repairers, a narrow shop between the apothecary and a bookseller that respectable wives acknowledged only in cautionary anecdotes. Snowmelt dripped from awnings and gathered in dark seams along the curb. She stepped down without waiting for the footman's hand. Inside, the air smelled of brass polish, damp wool and old paper. A bell chimed once as she entered. Behind the counter, a man with ink on 2 fingers looked up, took in her quality of coat and the absence of maid or companion, and adjusted his posture into careful neutrality. "Madam." She set the velvet case on the counter, opened it, and turned the bracelet so the stones caught window light. "I require immediate liquidity. Against this." He lifted the piece with a cloth, examined clasp and setting, then looked at her again, longer this time. "This is not ordinary stock." "No," she said. "I can advance 60. "It is worth 140. "In May, perhaps, not in December." She met his eyes. 75, and you issue a clean ticket under my married name." He hesitated, calculating risk as visibly as if he had spoken each number aloud. 70, final. "Done." He counted notes and coin. She signed the ledger, Mrs. Mia Harrow, in a hand that did not tremble, accepted the pawn ticket and tucked it into her reticule. When she turned, she found her own reflection in the glass case. Hat brim damp at the edge, jaw set, no ornament at either wrist. At the apothecary she purchased fever powder, willow bark tincture, and laudanum in measured vials for 2 dockside households whose children had persistent coughs and whose mothers had signed petitions too politely to be believed by men who read only totals. At the coal yard she paid in advance for 4 deliveries, 2 marked to Widow Price's Lane, 2 to the dock cottages behind Harrow's lower warehouse, where wind cut through plank walls. She wrote each address herself and required receipts signed by the foreman in duplicate. From there she went to the warehouse office where clerks paused as she entered, surprise passing through them like a draught under a door. She laid the receipts on the desk before Mr. Finch, the transport clerk who had once told her technical matters, were not work for her judgment. "Record these as temporary private disbursements," she said, "not charity. Advance against labour continuity." He blinked. "Mrs. Harrow, this office cannot accept private." "It can note them," she said, "and it will. If your books omit fuel and medicine during contract winter, your spring labour rolls will fail. I prefer prevention to apology." He reached for the papers with visible reluctance. "As you direct." "Not as I direct," she replied, "as arithmetic directs." Outside, by the loading bay, she found Pike overseeing a stack of salvaged timber with the focused severity of a man returned to usefulness. He touched his cap when he saw her. "Mrs. Harrow, the braces for the widow's roof are set. I used half the estimate." "Then bill full and keep the difference for your apprentice tools," she said. His mouth tightened with pride. "I cannot take what was not earned." "You earned it by charging honestly." She handed him one packet of the apothecary medicines wrapped in brown paper. "For Hale's family at Dock Row. Deliver it to Mrs. Hale directly." He accepted the packet carefully in his left hand. "Yes, ma'am." She turned toward the carriage and stopped when she saw a familiar dark coat across the yard near the tally shed. Mr. Harrow stood partly shadowed by stacked crates, hat brim low, speaking with the weighmaster. He did not call to her. He did not move toward her. Yet she knew by the stillness in his stance that he had seen the receipts exchange, the apothecary packet, the addresses written in her hand. At supper that night he arrived late, removed gloves one finger at a time, and sat opposite her in the small dining room. For several minutes they discussed road ruts near the south turn and a missing shipment of lamp oil. Then he set down his fork and asked, "How much did Baron advance?" Mia kept her eyes on her plate. 70. For the bracelet. Yes. Silence followed, not accusatory, not soft. She lifted her water glass and found that her wrist felt strangely light, where emerald weight had rested for years. "It was my father's," she said, "because a mission now would be theatrical. It is also a piece of metal and stone. Dock children cannot burn sentiment for heat." His gaze did not leave her face. "Why did you not tell me?" "Because I did not spend your money, nor keep yours." She looked up then. "Mine was being withheld as leverage. I declined the lesson." Something in his expression altered, and when he smiled, it was not the brief courtyard recognition she had already catalogued. It opened his face from guarded authority into unmistakable warmth, as if a door she had not known was there had been unlatched from within. "You spend like someone who intends to stay," he said. The sentence settled through her with an unexpected steadiness. Not flattery, not claim, merely acknowledgement of choice as fact. She answered in the same register. "I did not come to rehearse departure." He inclined his head once, almost formal again. "Good." Just past dusk, the house held that brittle stillness which comes before snow. Mia finished copying warehouse corrections in the west room and carried the packet to the library, because Mr. Harrow had requested the final pages before solicitor post. Candlelight moved along the corridor walls in thin bars as she walked. The library door stood nearly closed, not latched. She heard voices before she reached it. Mr. Harrow's, low and even. Another man, likely the solicitor from Canterbury by his clipped consonants and habitual throat clearing. Mia slowed, papers against her chest, and paused in the narrow space between console table and door frame where the corridor turned. Through the thin gap she saw only the edge of the library hearth and Mr. Harrow's sleeve as he stood by the mantel. The solicitor said, "And Mrs. Harrow remains unaware?" "She is perceptive," Mr. Harrow replied. "Awareness is not the same as proof." A page rustled. Quill tapped glass. The solicitor again. "Then timing is the question. If we delay beyond quarter day, Thompson's counsel may argue inducement through marriage itself." Mia's fingers tightened on the packet until paper corners pressed into skin. Mr. Harrow answered without hesitation, each word precise. 3 months under Julian's name were sufficient. Mrs. Thompson exposed herself once the marriage was binding. For an instant she could not locate breath. The corridor seemed to narrow, walls drawing inward by degrees too small to see and too real to deny. She set her free hand against the doorframe, wood cold under her palm, and felt the bones at her knuckles pale with pressure. Inside the library, the fire snapped once. Ordinary sound in an altered world. The solicitor said something about codicils and witness affidavits. She heard none of it as language, only cadence. 3 months? Sufficient. Binding. Instrument, not wife. Strategy, not alliance. She had entered the church as a calculation and had been met by one. A floorboard shifted beneath her shoe. Conversation inside paused. Mr. Harrow's voice came toward the door, not raised. "Who is there?" Mia released the frame, straightened the packet edges with meticulous fingers, and stepped back from the gap before the door opened. When it did, he stood in library light, expression attentive, unreadable in the half-shadow. "Mrs. Harrow," he said, "you should be at supper." She held out the papers. Her hand remained steady because she had trained it to be. Warehouse corrections, signed and copied. He accepted them, searching her face with that same exactness he brought to ledgers. "Were you waiting long?" "No." The solicitor appeared behind him, spectacles low on his nose, coat still buttoned from travel. He bowed with professional courtesy sharpened by curiosity. "Mrs. Harrow." "Sir." From downstairs the dinner bell rang once, clear through the stairwell. Mr. Harrow said, "Come, the meal is laid." Mia met his eyes and heard her own voice answer in a level tone that betrayed nothing of the pulse hammering at her throat. "I will join you directly." He hesitated, then gave a short nod and stepped back into the library. The door closed. Mia stood alone in the corridor until the second bell. Her palm still held the shape of the doorframe grain. She flexed her fingers, smoothed her sleeve, and walked to supper at an unhurried pace. Each step placed with the same deliberate control she had used when she signed a wrong name in a church register and called it freedom. She entered the small dining room at the second bell with her shoulders square and her pulse hidden, and found only 2 covers laid, as if the house itself had conspired to keep the evening ordinary, while nothing in her was ordinary any longer. Mr. Harrow rose when she took her chair. His expression gave her no advantage. The candlelight caught the familiar worn edge of his cuff, the same careful plainness he had worn from church to warehouse to library door, and she discovered that restraint could wound as sharply as contempt when one had mistaken it for safety. Soup was served, bread was passed. He asked whether the South Lane coal reached Widow Price before dusk. She answered that it had. She asked whether the toll books from the lower gate were complete. He said they were not, and that he had ordered verification at first light. Their voices remained level, formal, competent. Across the silver, her hand did not shake once. When the second course was cleared, he set down his knife and looked at her directly. "You are pale. Are you unwell?" "I am perfectly serviceable," she said. A pause lengthened. "That was not my question. It is my answer." He accepted it with a slight inclination. No argument, no appeal. By the time the tray of pears arrived, she understood the final cruelty of the evening. He would not force confession from her, and she would not give him one he had not earned. She rose before coffee, offered the courtesy due a husband she had chosen and a strategist she had not, and left the room with measured steps while the footman held the door as though this were any other night. In the blue chamber she shut the latch, crossed to the valise, and opened it on the bed without sitting down. One wool day dress, one darker gown suitable for legal rooms, and no social room at all. A chemise, stockings, gloves, comb, and her father's small brass travel inkwell. She added the pawn ticket from Barron and Sons, Lenora's letters with their black seals, copies of the dock disbursements she had paid in cash, the eviction notices signed from London authority, and her own ledger pages marked in her narrow hand, where relief had been cut to families still living under Harrow contracts. She packed as she had packed before. No wasted motion, no audience, no explanation rehearsed in advance. At the escritoire, she drew a clean sheet and wrote by candlelight until wax pooled at the base. I, Mia Harrow, decline immediate claim to household discretionary funds, trust distributions and personal advances pending legal review of my marital and fiduciary status. Let no expenditure in my name be construed as inducement, entrapment, or coercive dependency. She signed, sanded the ink, copied the statement twice, and folded one copy into her reticule and one into the valise. The original she carried downstairs herself. The study door stood open. Mr. Harrow remained at the desk with the Canterbury solicitor. Both men bent over documents under a green-shaded lamp. He looked up when she entered, grey eyes alert at once. Mrs. Harrow. Mr. Harrow. She placed the signed declaration on the blotter between them. This is for your records. The solicitor reached for the page. Mr. Harrow stopped him with a glance and read the statement himself, once, without interruption. When he finished, his fingers stayed on the paper as if testing its weight. You are leaving, he said. Before dawn. You need not. I need not remain either. His jaw tightened by a fraction. If this concerns what you heard at the library door, you heard one sentence detached from context. Context is a luxury for the person holding the strategy, she replied. The instrument rarely receives it. The solicitor cleared his throat and looked toward the hearth, suddenly devoted to discretion. Mr. Harrow did not look away from her. You are not an instrument. Then you should have chosen language that did not fit the role so neatly. She slid a second folded page toward him. Household corrections pending my audit are listed there. Pike's stipend is current for 10 days. Widow Price's coal is paid through Monday. Hale's medicine schedule is marked by dose. He took the page but did not unfold it. Where will you go? To London. To your mother's house. Yes. His voice lowered. That threshold is not neutral ground. Nor this one tonight. She held his gaze, then added, with the same formal control she had used in rooms designed to diminish her, I will not accuse you in your own study. I will not plead in mine. We can proceed by law. For the first time since she had met him, genuine urgency crossed his face, swiftly contained but visible enough to matter. Mia. She stilled. He had dropped the title and seemed to hear himself do it. Mrs. Harrow, he corrected, each syllable deliberate. If you choose court, choose it with full papers. Do not walk in with only anger. I do not possess only anger. She touched the valise handle at her side. I possess records. She inclined her head to the solicitor. Sir. Then she turned and left, before either man could offer escort or command, because this action needed to be hers entire. By first light, frost filmed the carriage windows as the Harrow horses cut north toward London. She sat with the valise at her feet and watched Kent fields flatten into turnpike and then into city brick, the same route in reverse, and nothing like return. Her cost was plain. She was leaving a house where authority had begun, however cautiously, to answer to her hand. She was entering one where every carpet had memorized her obedience. Yet by the time the carriage turned into Grosvenor Square, her breathing had steadied into the cold, reliable rhythm she used before signing her name to irreversible things. Lenora Thompson received her in the morning room as if they had arranged a tea call. Pearl pins exact at the throat, sleeves smooth, fire moderate, never generous. A tray stood ready with 2 cups and 1 untouched plate of almond biscuits. You have come to your senses, Lenora said. Mia remained standing. No. Lenora's eyes moved once to the valise, then back to her daughter's face. Then you have come to negotiate. I have come to notify. Mia withdrew a folded petition copy and laid it on the table beside the tea service. Release me or court. 4 words, no tremor. Lenora did not pick up the paper. You are already in court, whether you know it or not. Marriage is jurisdiction. Then we will test jurisdiction against fraud. At that, Lenora's mouth thinned with something like boredom sharpened to a blade. You always did mistake arithmetic for power. I learned arithmetic from watching power misfile itself. Lenora lifted her cup. You will not survive Chancery. You have no patron, no title of consequence, and no independent liquidity worth naming. Mia reached into her reticule and placed the pawn ticket beside the petition. I have enough liquidity to file. I have enough evidence to compel response. I have enough stamina to outlast your clerks. A beat of silence followed, heavy as velvet drapery. Then Lenora set down her cup with care. Very well, we proceed. She rang for the butler and instructed him, without raising her voice, to send immediate note to Thompson Counsel and request emergency chambers hearing before noon. When the man withdrew, Lenora added, You will remain here until called. I will remain in the hall, Mia said. As you wish. Mia took her valise and waited in the long corridor outside the morning room beneath portraits of men who had inherited ships and women who had inherited silence. Servants passed her with trained impassivity. Somewhere upstairs a clock struck 11. She did not sit. An hour later, a messenger in legal black arrived with sealed instructions for both parties. Appearance required at Chancery Annex Chambers, 2 o'clock, with documents supporting trust and marital claims. Lenora's carriage was ordered. Mia did not ask to share it. She hired a hackney with her remaining coin and arrived 3 minutes before the appointed hour, skirt hem damp with city slush, jaw set against the corridor chill. The chambers smelled of wool, wet leather, and old parchment. Clerks moved stacks of tied bundles from table to table with devotional speed. Lenora sat with counsel at the left bench, gloved hands folded, face composed for spectators who pretended not to watch. Mia took the right bench alone and set her valise beside her boot. When called, she submitted her packet in sequence. Signed declaration renouncing immediate Harrow funds, copies of relief disbursement cuts traced to Thompson orders, corrected tenant ledgers, dock receipts paid privately, and the pawn ticket establishing the date and amount she had raised rather than draw from contested accounts. The clerk raised an eyebrow at the ticket, then logged it carefully under exhibits. 3 days passed before she heard from dispatch again in the form of procedural delay, read aloud by a junior registrar. Further review required. Trust codicils to be produced by both sides. Marital identity verification requested due to contested standing. Lenora's counsel requested adjournment. Granted. New hearing set for the same week, same rooms, full submissions, mandatory. On the morning of the resumed hearing, the benches filled earlier. Rumour had outrun protocol. Mia entered with her valise lighter by 1 packet and heavier by consequence, and found Mr. Harrow already present at the far table with the Canterbury solicitor and another barrister she did not know. He wore dark formal coat, unadorned, posture unmistakably military, now that pretense had narrowed. The worn cuff was gone. In its place, precise tailoring that fit him like truth, withheld too long. When her name was called, she stood. Lenora stood opposite. The registrar requested clarification of marital party identity before trust arguments could proceed. Silence settled over the room. Mr. Harrow stepped forward 1 pace. His voice carried cleanly. No drama, no plea. I am not Julian Harrow. I am Elias Harrow, his younger brother. I wore his name while proving your mother forged codicils and diverted your father's trust. The words were quiet enough that the clerk had to ask him to repeat the second sentence for the record. He did, unchanged. In Mia's chest, outrage and relief collided, then separated into something harder, clearer. The contradictions aligned in an instant. Magistrates rising by reflex, the signet hidden under glove, the command acknowledged in a foundry yard, the left-hand writing when habit demanded camouflage, the careful plain coat worn like a legal argument against recognition. What she had mistaken for contempt had often been containment. What she had taken as strategy without her had also been strategy against the machinery that had trained her to believe she could be collateral forever. Lenora's composure fractured only at the eyes, briefly, then gone. The registrar turned to Mia. "Mrs. Harrow, do you contest this declaration of person?" She looked at Elias, at last by his own name, and found no triumph in his face, only readiness to accept whatever she chose now that concealment was spent. "No," she said, "I contest the forgeries." Her voice remained level. Her hand, resting on the worn handle of the valise she had packed twice to save her own life, was steady as stone. The registrar took her answer, dipped his pen, and passed the file to the Chancery examiner without looking up again. Paper moved. Seals were broken. The room's attention narrowed to ink. Lenora's counsel rose first, voice smooth with practiced fatigue. "My client disputes the allegation of forgery in full and requests immediate dismissal of these theatrics founded upon a husband who entered marriage under false designation." Ilias did not turn his head. "Designation is before this chamber by my sworn declaration. The codicils are before it by their own defects." The examiner, an elderly man whose cuffs were frayed but clean, adjusted his spectacles and held up two documents side by side: her father's final trust instrument and the later codicil that had kept control under Lenora's hand until issue. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "did you witness this supplementary codicil being signed?" Lenora's expression remained immaculate. "I did. Who else was present?" "Mr. H. Sibley, my late husband's clerk." The initials. H.S. Mia felt the old click of pattern aligning. The examiner signalled. A side door opened. A narrow man with thinning hair and a collar buttoned too tightly stepped forward, hat crushed in his fingers. He did not look at Lenora when he took the stand. He looked at the floorboards. "State your name." "Horace Sibley." "Did you witness Mr. Thompson sign this codicil?" Sibley swallowed. "No, sir." No one moved. Even the clerks stopped sorting bundles. Lenora's counsel spoke sharply. "You were compensated by Harrow Counsel for this appearance." Sibley flinched. "I was subpoenaed." He drew a breath that shook at the edge. "Mr. Thompson had already died when Mrs. Thompson instructed me to copy his hand from earlier manifests. She said the trust required correction, and there was no time for legal delay." Lenora turned at last, slowly, and fixed him with the same bored cruelty Mia had known all her life. "You are mistaken." Sibley's face drained, then steadied by degrees, as if he had reached the last thing fear could take. "No, ma'am, I am finished being mistaken." The examiner requested the ink analysis packet. Elias's solicitor submitted it. Charcoal rubbings, pressure comparison, and sworn statements from two stationers in London who had sold the later paper stock months after Mr. Thompson's burial. One by one, the pieces entered the record, each small, each fatal. Lenora's counsel tried again. "Even if procedural irregularity exists, Mrs. Harrow's position remains compromised by inducement and concealment within the marriage itself." Mia stood before she understood she had risen. My declaration renouncing immediate claim was filed before identity disclosure and entered 3 days ago. The pawn ticket is dated prior to filing. I paid relief from my private pledge rather than draw from contested funds. If inducement was the accusation, I removed its mechanism. The examiner nodded once to the clerk. "Read Exhibit 14. The clerk read aloud in a monotone. "I, Mia Harrow, decline immediate claim. Let no expenditure in my name be construed as inducement, entrapment, or coercive dependency." Her own words sounded less like defense now and more like architecture. Lenora's eyes shifted to Mia then, for the first time with something beyond contempt. Calculation, rapid and cold. "You always needed instruction," she said quietly, not to the room, not quite to her daughter. "Now, you borrow a man's strategy and call it will." Mia met her gaze. "No, mother." 4 words would have been enough. 1 was cleaner. By late afternoon, the examiner returned with written findings, wax still soft where the seal had been set. The order was read in full. The supplementary codicils were voided. Lenora Thompson was removed as trustee with immediate effect, pending civil penalty review. Control of the Thompson Trust reverted to principal beneficiary Mia Harrow, with oversight by independent court-appointed auditors for 1 quarter. Relief suspensions issued from the Thompson office to Harrow Properties were declared unauthorized interference. Costs assigned to Lenora's estate. Lenora did not protest. She sat very straight, gloves folded over one another, while her counsel whispered options that sounded like paper burning. When the session adjourned, she rose and walked out through the side passage reserved for parties under sanction. She did not look back. In the corridor, the air smelled of wet wool and sealing wax. Clerks resumed motion at once, already carrying her life in tied bundles towards archives. The registrar approached Mia with a docket sheet and a box of returned exhibits. "Mrs. Harrow, these are released to your custody unless you wish them retained." Inside lay her mother's letters with black seals broken and tagged, her own copied ledger pages, the disbursement receipts, and the pawn tickets stamped entered and verified across the centre. Mia touched each packet in turn as if counting pulse. "Release to me," she said. A few paces away, Sibley hovered uncertainly by a stone pillar, hat still twisting in his hands. He had given the truth and looked surprised to still be standing. Mia crossed to him. "Mr. Sibley." He bowed awkwardly. "Mrs. Harrow, I should have spoken years ago." "You spoke today." His eyes shone with old shame and fresh relief. "Your father once covered my son's apprenticeship fees when I could not. I did not repay him when it mattered. I will submit full records if your solicitors require them." "They will," she said, "and you will be paid for your time as witness. Properly, through counsel. No private arrangements." Something like dignity returned to his shoulders. "Thank you, madam." The title landed quietly. Correct at last. Elias waited at the end of the corridor near the west stair, apart from the knot of barristers. Without the borrowed name between them, he looked both more familiar and less knowable, as if every earlier scene had been relit from another angle. The signet ring was visible now. No glove, no disguise. "The order is enforceable tonight," he said. "Thompson offices are being served by 6. You arranged dispatch quickly." "I arranged it weeks ago in case this hour came." She held the box of exhibits against her ribs, including the hour I walked out. "Yes," a pause, "especially that hour." They stood in a silence that did not demand immediate repair. Behind them, Lenora's counsel passed with a stiff nod and did not speak. The loaded looks from months of rooms and corridors had resolved into record or irrelevance. None remained pending. By the following Thursday, The shipping board met in the Thames committee rooms where Mia had once been invited, only to pour tea and smile on command. The same high windows looked over grey water and crowded masts. The same mahogany table held maps, tariffs, and men who had practiced dismissing her without moving their mouths. When she entered, conversation lowered, then shifted. Not warmth, recognition. Mr. Finch, the transport clerk who had called technical matters beyond her judgment, rose from his chair before she reached the table. "Mrs. Harrow, your seat is here." He indicated her father's former place at the right of the chair, not the side table for observers. His face was pale and precise with effort. "I have prepared corrected labour continuity statements incorporating your winter disbursement model. It prevented spring losses exactly as you forecast." She took the packet, reviewed the top page, and set it down. "Then keep the model. Name it Operational Standard, not Exception." "Yes, madam." The chairman cleared his throat. "By Chancery Order entered and served, Mrs. Harrow is recognised as principal beneficiary and voting authority for the Thompson share in these contracts. Let it be reflected in minutes." Pens scratched. No one objected. At the far end of the table sat Lord Ashcombe, immaculate and silent, his signet hand resting on a closed portfolio he did not open. Once he had discussed her as collateral over bergamot tea. Now he requested permission to table his motion and was denied on procedural grounds by a clerk half his age. Social authority dried to paperwork in less than a minute. The meeting moved on to river insurance rates, dock safety, and spring routes. Mia spoke when figures required correction. Men who had once addressed questions over her shoulder now turned toward her before they answered. She did not savour it. She used it. After adjournment, she left through the side street. Carriage dismissed. Baron and Sons sat where it had always sat, bell still sharp over the door. The same man with ink on 2 fingers looked up, recognised her, and went very still. "Mrs. Harrow." She placed the stamped pawn ticket on the counter beside counted notes. "I am here to redeem." He examined the ticket, then disappeared into the back room. He returned with the velvet case wrapped in plain brown paper and set it down with unexpected care. "Untouched, madam." She opened it. The emerald bracelet lay against faded velvet, green as river glass. For a moment she saw her father's awkward hand fastening it at her wrist, not as ornament, as certainty. She closed the lid. "This item is no longer collateral," she said. "No, madam." By dusk she was back on the Kent road with the exhibits box, the redeemed bracelet, and the valise that had now crossed this route 3 times, and survived each crossing with her. Harrow Lodge stood ahead through bare beech trees, stone walls ash pale in the falling light. Lanterns burned in the front windows. The door opened before she reached the step. The butler bowed, and the hesitation that had once trimmed her title was gone. "Madam, welcome home." She handed him the exhibits box. "Archive these in the study cabinet, top shelf, indexed by date. The letters remain sealed within court wrappers." "At once, madam." Mrs. Beale appeared behind him, eyes bright with contained triumph. "Widow Price sent broth this afternoon for your supper. Pike insisted the south wall roses will recover if we are patient." "Then we shall be patient," Mia said. She turned at the threshold. Elias stood on the gravel path a few paces back, hat in hand, coat dark against the evening. No borrowed cuff, no borrowed name. Just the man who had opened doors and withheld truths, and then brought both into the light, where they could be judged. He came up 1 step, no farther. "Will you choose me now that you know my name?" The house behind her was warm with coal she had fought to keep burning. The road behind him led to courts, boardrooms, and every room where she would now be addressed correctly. or not at all. She set the valise down on the stone, reached for his hand, and felt his fingers close around hers with careful strength. "Yes," she said. Then, still holding his hand, she crossed the threshold and opened the front door herself,